Right, let's make a start. Thank you all very much for coming back. This is another session at EAMS. We've got two talks lined up for this afternoon. Before we get started with the talks, can I just remind everyone, please, that we are strongly suggesting that we put all the questions into the questions section of the discussion associated with this afternoon's session. So we've got Monday the 29th of June, 4 till 5, and we've got a questions section here. And if I open that up, please put your questions in here. This is working very well. Anyone who hasn't used it yet, this is working very well indeed for making sure that questions don't disappear from the chat once the session is closed, and that speakers can respond to those, and that those answers then are available to everybody, whether or not they were in the talk or whether they watched the videos later. So if you could put your questions there, that would be much appreciated. Great. So the first speaker this afternoon is Jake Medina, and he will be talking about online STEM assessment. Jake, are you ready?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Right, over to you.
Perfect. Can everyone see my screen? Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be talking with everyone. So overview of this talk real quick is going to be a lot of the web work development that we've been doing in partnership with the web work community and the web work community and CUNY. So a little bit about us. First off, I'm Jake Medina. I'm the CEO of a company called Redderly. And we have a bit of a different business model than most other companies. We're an open source company. We were built, or we have been built in partnership with the web work community. Like I said, we've been working super closely with the web work community and CUNY to add in, frequent updates and desired features. Everything is open source, which means that it's flexible. We don't have any vendor lock-in. We don't hide content behind a paywall. And then obviously reliability. We kind of handle a lot of the IT infrastructure. And I'll go more into this and you'll kind of see how these key values, kind of play across, but just a quick overview there. So a little bit of background to the project. This has been about a year of development effort. And it started really with, like I said, CUNY and the web work community. And I'm sure that a lot of you have heard, there's been other web work speakers this week. In CUNY, including Drew and Mariana, who spoke a little bit about the development work that's been going on at CUNY. So basically, over the course of the past year, 11 CUNY fellows from 7 different institutions have been doing content development and actually developing content on the platform, everything from algebra and trigonometry up through linear algebra, statistics, so on and so forth. And while they've been doing it at the same time, we've kind of been listening in on those meetings. They've been very gracious and letting us, kind of giving us things that they would like to see. We've also, the web work community, the web work leadership, Mike Gage, Robin Cruz, everyone's just been super, super nice and, giving us, willing to share their expertise. And that's kind of a lot of the background as to kind of how we've gotten to today. So obviously, things kind of changed a little bit in the spring, when everything shifted online. We're based in New York City. New York City got hit really hard. So all of the CUNY schools were kind of in this place where they're like, okay, how are we going to deliver final exams? And this is mainly the decision matrix that they were faced with. And a lot of them ended up going with web work. And I'll talk through how that went, some of the infrastructure pieces, and then how that influenced some of the development efforts that we did. But in terms of scaling quickly, kind of the options that were available to a lot of institutions were go with web work, which is great because you have question flexibility, you can control the randomization. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, the student inputs and automated grading. Another option that some did was going with their learning management system. There were pros and cons here, whether you just give multiple choice, there wasn't a lot of flexibility to ask complex mathematics problems. And then there were other providers out there that, were quick paid solutions, but a lot of them were out of the price point that they could afford. And it also was difficult because they couldn't actually author their own questions. So kind of going off of that, a lot did end up going with web work, and we did work closely with CUNY institutions to help deliver that. So just for the institutions that we work with, how it went, we served over 2,000 students. We had 100% uptime. I'll talk through the support materials in a little bit. So kind of going into the support, this was really the crux of delivering a successful final exam experience on WebWork. One thing that we were very clear about and that was very important to us was that the first time a student, when a student logged into an exam, it shouldn't have been their first time interacting with that software. So for a number of CUNY professors, they had already used WebWork a little bit, but their students maybe weren't super familiar with it. So we created tutorials, like a bunch of videos that they could watch, a bunch of written tutorials, and we also created an orientation test so that when they came in, it kind of wasn't their first experience with it. Another really key feature that was important to delivering final exams was which is 6,000 emails sent for login and resources, and then the 5-minute average response time. So something that we found is obviously as people are navigating these new online environments, having really easy access to support was really critical to delivering a successful final exam experience. And I'm also going to go into the lessons we learned from this and the updates we made because of that. But in terms of the test curation while we were there, it was a very iterative process, which is kind of similar to our model, where they actually delivered us final exams, like in an online format. We converted all of them into web work. It was basically a month-long process where we then, for a week after we had created them, we iterated with faculty to continually make updates to it. And then eventually we shared those out to all faculty so they could review the test in advance, share it with their students, and then we actually deployed it to students. But once again, this kind of critical planning phase was really important. We had over 125 questions created, and we did do controlled randomization so that any given question, there were 3 different question options within that little pool that it could pull from, so no one would really get the same exact test. Infrastructure, I'm not going to go a ton into this, but we had 100% uptime. We load balanced across 3 servers, and it went very smoothly. So that's a little bit of the background, but really where I kind of want to spend the crux of the conversation is the pathway forward. And these are the software updates that came from everything that we learned from, working with the WebWork community and CUNY over the past year, and also delivering final exams. So, I think what's similar to a lot of open source projects is there's a lot of really great kind of kernels in there. And for WebWork, the problem authoring is amazing. But at the same time, sometimes the tech infrastructure isn't exactly where where it could be. And so, based on discussions, we've come up with these four updates is the key features that needed to be added. And I'll show you a little bit of the new platform, but I just want to talk through each one. So persistent authentication is probably the most important one. In terms of user experience, the way that WebWork currently works is that for each individual class, you have a separate login. And we've made it so that you can log in once, and you basically have all of your classes there. So if a professor is, say, teaching, pre-calculus and Calc 1, it'll just be one login, they can see both. And if a student, is going across semesters and goes from pre-calculus to Calc 1, they'll retain that login. And obviously that's better from a student perspective, but what's really interesting, and we'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation, is from a data retention perspective, that's also very interesting. Because all of a sudden it opens up opportunities to start tracking that student's progress, so that you can say, does this student need an intervention? Have they been progressing as we expect them to progress? Can we see, is there like a common pitfall? Students clearly aren't understanding a specific concept. And we've been working a lot with researchers at CUNY to kind of flesh this out. And I'll show that and talk a little bit more about that later. So collaboration and creation, this really came out of the discussions that we had with the 11 CUNY fellows from the 7 different institutions, where they were all, and I think this is probably a common frustration, where you can basically create all of this content, but it's not super easy to just share it between between different institutions, between different classes. So we've made it so you can basically create these model courses that you can spin up, and everyone can kind of see the changes that are being made. And there's like different admin levels where an admin can kind of create these model courses for people to pull down. But what's the beauty of that, and I hope that a lot of you were able to go and see Drew and Mariana's talk where they talked about the different content they're developing, is that you can actually kind of, the way that CUNY's doing it now is they have, they're creating model courses that basically span the entire gamut of what, let's just say, pre-calculus. Like some start a little bit earlier, some go a little bit further in terms of concepts, and they're going to spin those out into a few different model courses aligned to open source textbooks. And what's great about this is, previously, if you wanted to get one of those few iterations of those specific, courses, you'd have to like ask the person, have them download their questions, send you the questions, upload them. This kind of makes it automatic. So that really, we would see CUNY as the start point, but ideally over time, if we can build more people into this ecosystem, all of a sudden, maybe someone in California or the UK could benefit from what CUNY is doing, and CUNY could benefit from what someone in the UK or California is doing, because it's so easy to share that content across. Redundancy. This one's another really important one. Tech infrastructure, I'm sure one of my major frustrations that I've heard, is you hear about all these online platforms that have been crashing, and there's really just no excuse for it. These platforms should be staying up. And right now, the way that web work works and a lot of infrastructure works is that if a platform goes down, it goes down. You have to respin it back up. And what we've done is allowed for two things: auto scaling and redundancy. This is a little bit techy, so I won't go too far into it, but auto scaling is super important because, say you during final exams or something, a ton of people start hitting a network very quickly, that'll take up capacity. And when it gets to 75%, well, first off, we always have two running, but if it gets to 75%, if they both hit 75%, a third will be spun up. And if that gets to 75%, a fourth will be spun up automatically. Redundancy means that, okay, we always have two up, and if for some reason one fails, the next one will be up. It can go to 75% and automatically another one will spin up. And it just means that it's a lot more reliable and it's a lot more secure. And then this customization and support. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a second, but one thing that's super exciting and like a little bit different about our model is that we really do work very closely with institutions. So we've started laying out different things that we could do. It's like, okay, yes, a base homework platform can deliver homework and it can grade it. But what if we could research? What if we could do A/B testing on, whether like this pedagogy or that pedagogy is more effective? For which students would it be more effective? We've talked about doing studies on how people are impacted by, the shift to online. By, specific intervention strategies. If they go to tutoring, is it improving them? Is it not improving them? And that really comes down to access to data and being able to track these students. And then we have an advisor portal that I'm going to talk about in a second as well. I'm actually going to share the screen that I am sharing so that you guys can see some of the updates that we've made. I'm not going to, go through this exhaustively. But, some of the stuff that we've created, you kind of can see this create course. I have different options here. I could create a college algebra and trig. You can add topics, add units. Once again, I'm not going to create this, but we could go into our pre-calculus course. And once again, this is just kind of dummy data that a professor could see. You can have your course description there. But what's really exciting is really like this details page right here, where you can have, we can have these interactive graphs saying like, okay, how are students doing on this specific homework assignment? We could really make this whatever you want. We could do A/B testing here, or maybe you give, two different sets of homework assignments to two different students. And if you think more broadly, just outside of the class, we could also port this up to, an entire department level where you're seeing different classes and seeing how they're progressing over time. And for a professor coming in too, they could probably say, okay, problem 7 is the issue here. Like maybe we need to go over that in class. Once again, I'm not going to go through everything here. We have our grades page. We can really, go into that. But Another thing that's very interesting that we built out is this statistics page where you can come in and see average number of attempts on a problem, the average grade. We can kind of make this into whatever, whatever people want, whatever people want it to be, whatever statistics they want on their class to kind of, to kind of make it simple. And then the other thing I'll show you before kind of going back to the presentation is we did kind of mock out what an advisor view could look like with some interactive graphs. Basically saying like, okay, as an advisor, if you have certain students, can you track them in real time? And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I'm going to go back to the presentation. Perfect. Okay, so I'm actually going to skip ahead real quick to the use cases here. So just talking through the different use cases. Obviously, homework and exams are super interesting and important, and that's kind of the base functionality. I'll go back to that exam slide in a second. But since we just looked at that advisor interface, something really interesting that we've talked about with CUNY advisors and CUNY researchers are whether you can use a lot of these online mathematics homeworks to try to increase retention. So, obviously, retention is a big issue, particularly for developmental mathematics in the US. A lot of people kind of get caught, in this kind of phase where they're taking these developmental courses. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, developmental remediation and that debate. And, one thing that's really interesting that we can do here is once again, pipe that data to the people that need it. So we've talked to a lot of advisor programs, and the feedback that we've gotten is that traditionally the way that advising is done is that students will basically be in a course, and then halfway through the course, they'll send their professor a survey saying, does this student need an intervention or not? And whether this professor says yes or no, that student will then be signed up for tutoring. But if you think about the time that takes from a student, starting a course and maybe struggling from the beginning to when that professor fills out that survey halfway through the semester, we might be talking like on the best case scenario, a month, and on the worst case scenario, 2.5 months. And so by giving advisors data, real-time data on how their students are doing in a course, all of a sudden we can reduce that time to say, okay, if a student maybe has struggled in the last two, maybe on the last 2 homework assignments, that would automatically get flagged to an advisor who could then assign an intervention strategy pretty much in real time. And the other thing that's very interesting that we could do is you can then loop back and assign a diagnostic test afterwards. Because right now, a lot of these intervention strategies, when they happen, there's really no follow-up. It's like, okay, check the box. This student went to tutoring, but we don't know whether that's effective. We can't really study it. But since we have more data coming through, all of a sudden we can start looking at that and saying, okay, we can give a diagnostic assessment. Do they understand the concept that they went to tutoring for? Is this helping their performance going forward? It creates a much richer data set and a much richer ability to really intervene on students' behalf. So that's kind of the targeted intervention. The research is critical too. We have kind of data scientists on our staff that have been talking with researchers and saying, what functionality can we automate for you? How can we make this easier? And really the research, we kind of see over the next few years that we want to be putting out papers and publishing our findings. Obviously we'll anonymize everything, but just kind of on broad swaths, like, what's effective, we've already talked with our CUNY fellows on, whether if you loop back content, is that more effective than if you just go straight through? What's the most effective way for students to be preparing for exams? Can we measure that? Can we not measure that? And all of that, once again, comes down to access to data and working with researchers. And then zero textbook costs. One thing that's very important to us and very important to the CUNY fellows that we work with is that, this should be free to students. We personally, for institutions that we work with, charge a flat institution rate. We don't actually charge students. And the content being developed at CUNY is all OER aligned, so that students won't have to pay for that. So I do want to talk a little bit about final exams too, because this is kind of a hot button issue now, especially with a lot of schools going online. So we did have some takeaways from that as well, and some features that we're building out. Obviously, you know, web work's great because you can ask the questions you want. You can ask complex questions. You know, you can have GeoGebra built in. I know that you guys are all familiar with that. But, you know, we have talked about some possible customizations, and we're still in discussions here. We haven't actually fully built out these features. But some interesting discussions that we've had is, one, a lot of professors have told us that they feel like the conversation around mathematics is not as much there in the online environment. And they've also said, obviously, you know, cheating has been an issue, and some professors have incorporated oral interviews into their final exams. And so we've talked about trying to incorporate that into the WebWork platform, where basically students, after they answer a question, could kind of click a button and then describe their process for how did they come to an answer. Obviously, we would have the option to record it, you know, in an audio or written, you know, they could type it out too. But it'd be an interesting way. It's kind of a non-traditional way, you know, when we think of normal paper and pencil, you know, exams. But once again, like, it's adding in a different component. Can we kind of like start to expand this? Another complaint that we had, that a lot of people felt like they were navigating multiple different modalities of technology, that maybe they would give the exam on WebWork and then they would have students upload their written work on their LMS. And it just didn't make sense. It got very confusing. So we thought about just creating an automatic upload function within the WebWork platform. And the other thing is, we do want to explore this dashboard idea where, you know, this is kind of similar, where everything can live in one place. You know, where you could see a student's answers, you could maybe see their audio file and their written work, and you could even maybe, like, you know, start scheduling sessions with their students to discuss all of their work together in this one place, to have a dashboard where you can really have a discussion about mathematics. So that's a little bit about finals. And then just kind of where we're going from here. This is my last slide, so if anyone has any questions after this, I'd be happy to answer them. But where we're going from here, obviously, like, you know, this has been a year kind of conversation for us that has gotten us to this point. But really, we're working with a bunch of institutions, and the approach that we take to it is, one, whenever we work with an institution, we start with a discussion, because I really do feel like each institution has specific needs, whether it be reporting needs that they want to automate, you know, specific research programs or advisor programs that they want to build out. So we have that discussion. Obviously, we decide to partner, and then it's really a collaboration on, you know, they kind of tell us what they want. We start to build it into the platform, and there's this iterative process. And then we kind of deploy, and we have this forward arrow for a reason, because this is an ongoing conversation that we have with people. You know, we continually kind of, you know, add features, refine. And the beauty of this, once again, is that we were working with multiple institutions, and we're open source. So whether you work with us or not, you can benefit from this. You can pull it down. You know, that basically, like, you know, we're trying to kind of build this ecosystem where everyone can be sharing ideas, and everyone, you know, can benefit from those ideas. You know, obviously, like, you know, kind of our bread and butter is homework and exams, support, cloud hosting. I'm not going to go through that too much. But that's a little bit about our platform. I'm looking forward to sharing, you know, hopefully sharing some more updates later, because this is a continual refining process. But I'll pause there and open up if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Jake. Thank you very much. I think the colleagues I know who are attending, many of us are practicing mathematicians and teachers, and don't consider all the infrastructure that has to be there to support all of this. I mean, a stick of chalk is looking like an elegant weapon for a more civilized age at this point, isn't it, really? Which leads on to the questions in the topic. Mike Gage has asked about the load balancing servers. But actually, I mean, phrasing Mike's question a bit more generally, how much of these things really have anything to do with WebWork specifically? I mean, if you would need to do load balancing for most other online learning systems, wouldn't you, for example?
Yeah. So
how much of what you're,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
How much of what you're discussing is specific to WebWork, and how much of this is would apply in other situations?
I think a lot of it would apply. I mean, some of it's specific, obviously, in terms of, I mean, the actual infrastructure we've built out is specific to WebWork. But in terms of the, you know, the load balancing and the auto scaling, really every platform could benefit from that. You know, I'm sure that people have had the frustration where a platform goes down, and it really is avoidable if you put the correct, infrastructure and data architecture on. One thing that we've had that was so interesting is that, if you look at the general environment now of, the providers that are out there, it's really kind of like, academics are doing one thing in the open source environment and providers are doing something else in the proprietary environment. And there's really not a lot of cross collaboration other than the fact that maybe, the proprietary people will pay an academic to just create content for them, or will pay an academic to write a book for them. But that's really the end of the relationship. And kind of what we're doing here is really kind of melding those two worlds where you have, you have the expertise, and this is a roundabout way, I'm going to get to the question, but really melding those two worlds, because when you put them together, what's so interesting is the model that we're having where CUNY is coming in and really creating this very rich content set. And we are on the back end doing things like auto scaling and redundancy that CUNY would never think of, because they're, we're working with mathematicians. This isn't their area of expertise. A lot of them didn't even know that this was a possibility. It wasn't even an option for them. And so really kind of melding those two worlds, and it comes out with discussion, really for any kind of open source math environment, this should be there so your students can reliably get on, particularly, if you think about the environment where we just had, where everything shifted online. I already said this, but I was candidly angry whenever I heard about a platform crashing, especially when it was a proprietary platform, because I was like, I know, because we do it, that you can avoid this. But a lot of that is based on discussion. So to answer your question, it really is, it can be applied to everything. We've just been applying it to web work in this situation.
And Christian was asking, how big's your team?
Yeah, so we have there's about 5 of us now. We have a bunch of software developers on staff. We have front end, back end. We have a research focused person, a data analyst. So we're all kind of working collaboratively. But, we really do view our team. I mean, I know that like those are the kind of the people that work directly for us, but we really do view our team more broadly in the sense that, we've been really talking a lot with the web work community, and they've provided invaluable insights in terms of, what, like a normal, like kind of, you might have like an internal R&D team that's doing communication. Because we have the web work community there, they're providing that feedback. All of the CUNY fellows, like I know they're not, once again, we're not working directly, they don't work directly for us, but because they're developing content that, and kind of feeding us ideas, it does really expand the team. So we just, I mean, in terms of this overall ecosystem, we obviously have our team, but, the web work team and the CUNY team have also been really pivotal, and very helpful in terms of giving us feedback, which has made it so much easier to kind of build these features out.
Yeah. And one last question. There are a number of questions on the forum we won't have time for. If Jake, you might like to follow those up afterwards.
Yeah, I will.
If you're happy to do that. But just one last question is about the research. Do you know whether the automated recommendations for tutoring are adequate?
Yeah, so that's something that we're that's something that we're researching. It's going to be like a to be determined. I think that it will definitely be a continually refined thing. I am thoroughly of the belief that what we're putting out will be better than that kind of 1 month to 2.5 month gap that we were describing, because people will get intervention sooner. But really, what's so interesting is that no one's asked that question, and I'm glad that question came up, because previously there was actually no way to study whether that was effective or not. And so what I think is going to come from this is we'll probably find that some things are effective and some things aren't. And then we're going to be refining that over time. But until you really can access that data and start asking those questions, the answer is we don't know, because it just hasn't existed before. And so I'm really excited that we can start asking those questions and actually start studying it.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Thank you very much for an excellent talk. The research question's a good opportunity to plug the additional working group tomorrow that's formulating a coherent research plan that's set up by Ian Jones and George Kinnear. So please do, if you haven't seen that, have a look on the EAMS website, and you're welcome to get involved if you'd like to. Ian, your talk. I understand you've pre-prepared your talk and we're going to press play, is that right? Wave and nod. Yeah, Ian, we're ready to go, Christian. So Ian Weir, and you're going to be talking about innovation.
My name's Ian Weir. That's me impersonating a vicar, which is the profession my mother wanted me to follow, but I disappointed her as I'm a lecturer in statistics at UWE. In 2014, I became part of the DEWIS development team at UWE, headed by Rhys Gwynthew and Karen Henderson, who I view as the DEWIS dynamic duo. My role has been to run the statistics side of DEWIS e-assessment. In this talk, I will tell you about some of the innovations in the e-testing of statistics for non-specialists that we have been responsible for. I am going to report on our experience of running a first-year module that is taken by over 400 business students at UWE. The module, which ran for the first time in the 2017-18 academic year, comprises a single semester course covering a challenging amount of material together with learning the use of SPSS. The students are non-specialists in statistics, with many of them last encountering any form of maths at GCSE level. The topics covered comprise the bread and butter of elementary statistical analysis. It is important that students gain sufficient competency and understanding of the techniques so that they are able to perform data analysis when collecting their own primary data in the Level 2 research project the following year. The following are some of the challenges that have been overcome by the use of e-testing on this module. How to teach the students so that they are able to self-learn SPSS. How to get the students to attain required statistical competency and understanding. How to support students to be capable of formal report writing. How to efficiently assess the large number of students. How to monitor student progress in a large cohort and to target those that are struggling. Students get 3 contact hours per week for the module. This breaks down to a lecture and supporting computer lab delivered by statistics staff and a tutorial from business school staff to supply relevant context to stats topics taught. Okay, so let's have a look at what the module assessment looks like. Well, the controlled conditions element is provided by the statistics staff. This needs to concern statistical knowledge, SPSS use, test choice, interpretation of output, formal report writing. The final mark is the average of the best 2 from 3 in-class tests that are spread out through this semester. In each e-test, a student receives their own unique data set to work on and performs a complete statistical analysis of it using SPSS. The uncontrolled conditions element is set by the business school. The students have to do a 1,200-word report that comprises the statistical analysis of a supplied dataset in response to a business question. The dataset has many variables, and the students decide something of interest that they choose to analyse and report on. This work is carried out at the end of the semester, i.e. after all of the statistics teaching. Online statistics support for potential dataset specific problems is provided. This very much is akin to giving supervision advice and may encompass issues that haven't been covered by the formal lectures. For example, dealing with low counts in a nominal variable. The assessments are called DEWIS-R e-assessments, where DEWIS supplies the administration of the assessment, but the statistical computations are performed by R. DEWIS is a fully algorithmic open source e-assessment system which was designed and developed at UE in 2007. There is a DEWIS-R interface to allow creation of e-assessments using R script. The diagram gives a pictorial representation of the setup. The student is sitting at a computer terminal and through Blackboard logs on to the DEWIS system. When the student starts an assessment, DEWIS runs R code which creates data. This then gets passed back to the student. The student puts the data into SPSS and gets output to answer various questions. The student then engages with the e-assessment system and when submits the answers, Dewis again runs some R code which provides the correct answers, and then Dewis provides the marks back to the student. Dewis Key Skill E-assessments are the main learning tool which have a narrow focus on mastering one specific statistical technique. These are designed to encompass the range of possible statistical outcomes, for instance significant or non-significant test outcomes. We encourage the students to have repeated use of these until they've mastered the technique and are comfortable with the various possible outcomes. Let us now consider an example of the Dewis Key Skill E-assessment. This E-assessment concerns using a 95% confidence interval for the mean to infer about a change to our hypothesized population value. The student is told that the IQ in the general population is 100 and that the box plot is the IQs of a random sample of people taking a certain medication. The student is asked if the 95% confidence interval for the mean indicates that the medication is affecting IQ. Note that having a graphic in the question allows immediate curiosity and for the gaining of a gut feel for the impending analysis. This is really useful when trying to encourage a student in a computer lab and reinforces the student's understanding of box plots. For instance, with this randomly generated data, I would explain that the median appears to be lower in the high 80s and that from the upper quartile we can see that around 75% of the people in the sample have an IQ less than 100. It thus does appear that whilst on this medication, IQ may well be lowered. I would point out that the second person in the dataset is a mild outlier who appears to have a rather high IQ, and that in a real analysis the least we should do is to check it is a genuine observation. In more advanced questions which involve test assumptions, I would also use these box plots to talk about symmetry, skewness and normality. I am always saying to the students that the box plot would be my desert island statistic if I was only allowed one. There is a download link to supply the data in a CSV file. The student has to transfer this into SPSS. Each Key Skill E-assessment has multiple embedded links to comprehensive help pages that provide SPSS how-to information or output interpretation. This form of support is more targeted and immediate than a student having to refer back to the notes. It allows students to work independently and at their own pace whilst also freeing up staff to concentrate on giving higher level interpretive advice. For instance, this one gives the SPSS instructions to import the CSV file. Once the data is in SPSS, there is a data transfer check that involves checking the standard error of the mean. There is a help page that explains the student needs to use the explore command to get the necessary output. Here it looks like I have transferred my data OK. When a student complains about getting wrong answers despite doing what is asked, this is the first point of call for the staff to usually diagnose that they have been in fact working on the wrong or a corrupted dataset. Note there is information on the accuracy to report results. For instance, here it is to report what they see on the screen, having successfully transferred their data to SPSS. If we now consider answering the questions, we note that the E-assessments give practice in the formal writing of statistics. So, filling in some answers, I see that the sample had 20 people in it with a mean IQ of 92.30. The lower 95% confidence limit is 85.97, so these three are correct answers. I won't answer the upper 95% confidence limit. As for the inference, we can see from the SPSS output that 100 is not contained within the confidence interval, thus the medication does appear to be affecting IQ in a detrimental way. However, I shall select the incorrect answer that the mean IQ appears to be higher. Note that there is a button to reveal the marking scheme, which here is 1 mark for a correct answer and no marks otherwise. OK, let's submit. The students get an initial report which briefly summarises the student's attempt and provides the E-assessment percentage score. The solutions section of the feedback supplies the correct answers that the student needed to complete. A pictorial representation of the confidence interval is included, along with accompanying text in blue that provides extra feedback information with the aim of aiding students' understanding of the correct inference to the question posed. The report section indicates with colour-coded marking what the student has answered correctly in green or incorrectly in red. It can be seen that the student has one wrong answer and a not answered input. Robin is currently working on identifying any such DEWIS accessibility issues, whilst Blackman is working on a solution that will automatically add ticks and crosses and will display messages when hovered over in a browser. I told you they were a dynamic duo. The students are encouraged to retry each Key Skills E-assessment until they've mastered it. By repeating them, they'll experience various analysis outcomes which will prepare them for the future. For instance, in this run, it's not clear whether there has been a significant change in IQ. This indeed is confirmed by performing the formal analysis. Through the DEWIS management system, staff can view the marks and feedback of each and every student attempt. This is useful to ascertain and subsequently address common misunderstandings amongst a cohort. The student at a later date can return to the feedback pages of any previous attempts, which is useful when seeking further clarification of understanding at a convenient mutual times that suit both them and the staff. We have created a web resource whose link is on the conference Moodle site. This focuses on the student learning journey up to the first in-class test, which they sit in week 5. You can view week-by-week information on the teaching and learning activities in the lecture and computer labs. Each week's Key Skill E-assessments are listed, along with their rationale and design features, and you can click on the Try Me buttons and have a go yourself. In week 2, a supplementary teaching activity is introduced, which are pre-written analysis templates. Students are required to populate these with SPSS output, numerical values and interpretation decisions. This allows students to practice importing output into Word, and when completed give them a portfolio of analysis reports to refer to in later student life. Week 3 has the most Key Skill E-assessments. In total there are 11 that get them ready for the in-class test in week 5. You can try the first in-class test and see how this combines the key skills learned to enable the students to perform a data-dependent analysis involving either the one-sample t-test or its non-parametric equivalent, the Wilcoxon signed rank test. We shall have a quick look at the in-class tests, which will give you an idea of its complexity, and I'll highlight some other features not seen in the key skill example. The question concerns a supplier of bottled mineral water who claims that his supplied water has an average sodium content of 37.0 milligrams per litre. Note that the null hypothesised average is random each time the test is accessed. There is a box plot of the sodium content levels taken from a random sample of 15 bottles. Note that data of random sample size is supplied each time the test is accessed. We have been asked to investigate the supplier's claim using SPSS to apply the appropriate test. Note that data is randomly generated so that with equal chance students would experience both tests and significant or non-significant results. The students need to do some exploratory data analysis, which includes looking at the 95% confidence interval for the mean to see whether the supplier's claim is plausible, i.e. utilise the key skill that we have already looked at. The student also looks at skewness and performs a normality test, which, together with the sample size, will inform the student which main test to perform. The main test is chosen using guidelines that the student has been taught that considered sample size, skewness and normality. The student has to choose between the one sample t-test and the Wilcoxon signed rank test. Only one test can be chosen. The student is reminded of the test choice decision rules, and the marking scheme is available, and this shows that correct selection of the main test is worth 3 marks. There is follow-on marking if a student makes a wrong test choice. If the student chooses the one sample t-test, then these inputs need to be entered. If the student chooses the Wilcoxon signed rank test, then these inputs have to be entered. The feedback solution shows a complete analysis with a defendable test choice. Note that there is extra feedback available to explain the correct test choice. The first in-class test has 22 inputs with 1 mark each, plus there are 3 marks available for the correct test choice. If students make the wrong test choice, then follow-on marks are carried out for the test that they performed. The second in-class test involves comparing 2 population averages. Students need to check test assumptions to decide which of 3 possible tests to report. The third in-class test concerns correlation or regression. We should now consider some of the mechanics for delivery of each of the in-class tests. Students had unlimited attempts to a practice test a week before the in-class test. Practice test is exactly the same as the in-class test that they would sit, except of course every time they practice it, different data will be generated, and hence different outcomes encountered. The test ran in the same session and room as the student's timetabled PC session. Each session was scheduled for 50 minutes, and the time limit for the in-class e-test was 30 minutes. Thus, with up to 50% extra time for reasonable adjustments, we were able to carry things out within the scheduled time. The in-class test link was protected by an examination key, and this was different for each PC group. So what were the e-test results like? The fieldboard reports indicated that there were 52 non-active students, and thus in the following I consider just the 365 active students. 94.5% of students took the first e-test, and the majority of these did very well. It was reassuring to see that there was a fair percentage of students who were capable of a perfect analysis. The second e-test was taken by less students, and the results were more spread out. Again, there was a fair percentage with high scores. The decline in the number of students attempting the third e-exam is due to the final mark for the in-class test component of assessment being the best 2 from 3. Many students with high marks from the first 2 tests elected to not take the final test. The lower mean mark for this test reflects this as well. Based upon the best 2 from the 3 e-tests, 88% of active students passed this element of the module. 115 students did all 3 tests, and 2 students got 100% in all 3 tests. I personally contacted the pair of them to congratulate them on this achievement. It is of interest to see how students prepare for each of the e-tests. Many students made multiple attempts at the practice tests. For the first e-test, the median number was 5 attempts. There were a few students who appeared to get addicted to the practice tests, the worst case being a student who had 96 practice attempts. I must admit I was a bit disappointed that this student didn't go for a 3-figure score, but the good news is that the student achieved 100% when they set the actual exam. The second e-test has the same median number of attempts. The third e-test had a lower median number of attempts and less OCD behaviour. Of those that sat each e-test, approximately half had previously tried the practice tests. I find this a surprisingly low amount. Those that did practice experienced a significant uplift in average marks compared to those that did not practice. Here we see that the uplift is not just significant, it's also substantial. Note to students. There was a high number of students who have viewed their feedback. For the first 2 e-tests, there was a figure of just over 80% of students that viewed the feedback. However, this dropped to 54% for the third test. Again, the drop in test 3 is probably understandable if some of the better students elected to not take this test. However, a little Robin has told me that this is much higher than the 10% that is typical for paper-based work. A similar module was run in semester 2, and it had its last 3 delivery weeks under lockdown. So how did this affect things? Fortunately, I had recorded the semester 1 lectures, so these got recycled. The computer labs became virtual through Blackboard Collaborate. Students were told to engage with the materials as normal, and to stick their hands up and collaborate when they wanted to talk to one of us. The students would then be moved into a private breakaway room where we answered their queries. Effectively, this is very similar to what would have happened in the computer lab. We held these at the same scheduled times as we knew the students were free and felt that maintaining a routine was a good thing to do. The third e-test became a remote one. They were held at the same timetabled times, with a half-hour window to start the test and DEWIS only allowing submissions within designated times, i.e. including extra time for those with reasonable adjustments. The transition to lockdown was thus not onerous. The following are some of our thoughts about the teaching approach that's just been described to you. We believe that students have a solid foundation in using SPSS to perform standard statistical tests. They will experience further material in the second year and will then use the techniques learnt to analyse real data in a substantial research project. The e-testing regime and continued access to the comprehensive learning materials will facilitate their transition to becoming independent researchers. E-testing was found to be suitable for life under COVID-19 lockdown conditions.
Well, thank you very much, Ian. Fascinating. I'm interested with your feedback research results. I know Martin Greenhow in the past has spoken about students doing everything possible to get to the work solution. They read the work solution and they have another go. Was that a sort of behaviour you observed or looked for?
Yeah, I think so. Well, you see lots of interesting behaviour if you monitor these students. For instance, there'll be people that will do practice tests and just submit without answering anything. Those people are doing exactly what you're talking about. They'll just look at it, see what they've got to do, and try and work things out. So, yeah, that's a possibility.
We've got a question from James about the exam package. Was that chained DAOIS R or other R packages? Kind of very specific developer question there, really.
Sorry, the package? Well, it's just normal R. What happens is I just write the questions in R code, obviously using all the statistical functions that are available. We've got an interface, a DAOIS R interface that Reese has built for me. And literally I just put my R code into it and run it with some DAOIS R tags. So it's slightly different to the normal DAOIS way of writing questions as such. So specifically it's a DAOIS R interface that uses R coding to sort of generate questions.
And my limited experience of statistics is there's often a lot more discussion than you would have in pure maths and interpretation, and there's, you have to have some narrative associated with data sets and there are real choices to be made. So how do you deal with those kinds of aspects of statistics?
Well, this is the good thing about when we have the computer labs, that with all the embedded self-help stuff, the staff don't spend time just saying, oh, how do I do this? And, just asking for button pressing sort of help. So it does mean that we can have these in-depth discussions, and generally that's what happens in the computer lab, where we're going around and we are talking about things at a slightly deeper level. Of course, in the uncontrolled assessment is where they have to actually write a report. So that's where they've got to be a bit more fluent in sort of the use of language. We're hoping through all the DAOIS activities that they kind of get used to, obviously, the formal way to report write results. There's the templates which get them used to kind of making Word documents where, because the template's already been written, they just have to concentrate on sort of the interpretation again. And, even that act of having to import things from SPSS, the output into Word documents, a skill they've got to acquire. Bear in mind that these are people that, a lot of them, surprisingly, haven't even used Excel. Again, this is one thing that I do find quite surprising, because you kind of assume that people would do that. And so, it really is quite a wide variety of skills that we have to deal with. But obviously by the time they do this 1,200 word report, that is their own writing. And it's just hoping that they can take enough from all the materials that I've made to put coherent sentences together that show that they've learned some statistics.
Yeah, I'm fascinated what you said about not knowing Excel. I think it is interesting to watch how the pendulum in school computer science swings away from programming to using applications and then back again to programming. And it's probably we're in a programming phase again at the moment, aren't we, with the microbit and the Raspberry Pi and all these other things. Whereas before that, that was a reaction to computer science becoming using applications.
Yeah, well, of course, this what I've talked about here is to non-specialists, so maybe I'm not so surprised that they aren't so fluent in Excel. But then again, you would have thought business environment, it's about time that they did learn that, and maybe that's one of the things they do get from university.
Good. Well, I think we have very few questions on the forum. Let me just double check. Yeah, so I think we'll draw to a conclusion there. Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you again, Jake. We have more sessions tomorrow morning. Let's just have a quick look at the talks for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock British Summer Time. We've got talks about Moodle question type for creating multiple choice questions and e-assessment in Jinan University. And I very much hope you can join us tomorrow, and we will call it a halt there. Thank you all very much.